Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're getting into some horrifying scary stories, and these are all scary stories sent in by you guys, viewers of the Snook channel. So yeah, these will be very interesting. You guys are great writers and you guys have some scary stories, so I'm excited to get into them. And they're going to be horrifying, weird, and scary, and I just want to stick around. And if you'd like to see your scary story in a future video, please send it to the email on screen now. Thank you. And yeah, I haven't done a video like this in a long time, so comment down below and let me know if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future. But yeah, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. And without further ado, let's get into some horrifying, scary stories. Picture this. It's late at night and you're scrolling video after video when suddenly you see it. That one product you've been looking for. You click the link, you're hooked. Maybe you browse a little more, but eventually it's time to check out. You start filling in your details and realize you don't even have your card nearby. But then you see it, the purple shop pay button. Everything already saved. No friction, no stress, just a single tap and it's done. And what feels that seamless for you as a customer is exactly what Shopify helps business owners create behind the scenes. Get started with your own design studio. With hundreds of ready-to-go templates, Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand style without needing to be a designer or a developer. Best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class tools and expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. It's built to handle the heavy lifting so you can focus on growing your business. And to help you move even faster, Shopify is packed with powerful AI tools that can write a product description, generate page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. So your store doesn't just get built, it gets built to convert. And when everything is built to convert, you see less carts go abandoned and more sales go with Shopify and their shop pay button. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/snook. That's shopify.com/snook. Thank you for Shopify for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back into it. Hey everyone. I grew up in a dense, thick forest in Estonia, a small northeastern country in Europe. My family and I lived in an extremely rural part of it. The nearest city, which is also considered to be small, but has all the necessary amenities, is a 40-minute drive away. No buses go that far into the countryside, and people tend to keep to themselves if you're a stranger or someone from the city. We moved there when I was very young. My father was also raised in the deep countryside, so he wanted me and my siblings to have the same kind of childhood. We own a fairly large piece of land near our home. It's mostly unkempt forest. Our house is a big wooden cabin, literally placed in the center of the forest. There are no close neighbors, no city noise, just complete silence, except for the distant growls of forest animals and the natural sounds of nature. I actually really loved living there. It's been about a half a year since I moved away for school, and I miss it a lot. I'm not a city person. Growing up surrounded by nature and by the unspoken rules of what you can and cannot do in a forest like that is something that's hard to forget. Adjusting to city life has been quite difficult. While living there, countless unexplainable things happened. Not many people believe in the supernatural, but actually living in a place where things like that occur can turn you into a believer very quickly. I worked there as a forest ranger for 3 years. I started by simply helping out, assisting with smaller tasks, and gradually worked my way up to a higher position. Eventually, I was able to join the official rescue team and work full-time. The nearest licensed forest ranger is a close family friend, and my father has been helping him for years. I followed in my father's footsteps and did the same. The first weird thing when working happened when I was 16. It was early summer, peak berry season. That was the year I started helping as a forest ranger in our area. I wasn't officially some big authoritarian figure or anything. I just helped the nearest licensed ranger because most of the land around there belongs to my family anyway. There are still sections owned by the country, and during summer, people from the city flood in to pick berries. And every single year, someone gets lost. Usually, it's harmless. Someone wanders off a marked trail. Someone thinks they can just cut through and ends up completely turned around. The forest out there looks the same in every direction if you're not used to it. Tall pines, moss, random patches of thick undergrowth. It doesn't take much to lose your sense of direction. Most of the calls we get were simple. An hour or two of searching, and we'd find someone embarrassed and dehydrated, but fine. That evening felt like one of those normal calls at first. We got word that an older woman had gone berry picking early that morning and hadn't come home. Her family said she always came back before evening. Always. She wasn't someone who wandered off for fun. There was a forest camera about 10 kilometers from our property that caught her in the afternoon. She was sitting on a tree stump, resting. The photo was grainy, but you could clearly see her light pink bucket next to her, already half full. She didn't look distressed. She just looked tired. Search teams started where the camera placed her. They found the stump, found some footprints, then nothing. No sign of a struggle, no dropped belongings, no obvious direction she'd taken. After a few hours with no luck, they asked if we could search our land too, just in case she had walked further than expected. It wasn't likely, but it wasn't impossible either. Me and my dad split up like we usually did. He took the northern side, closer to the marsh area. I took the ATV and drove deeper toward the property line and the older logging paths that barely anyone uses anymore. I remember calling her name every few minutes. My voice felt small out there. The trees just swallowed it. After about an hour, I hadn't found anything. No broken branches, no fresh tracks that stood out, just normal forest. It was getting late enough that the light started turning gray and flat. That time of evening where everything starts to lose color. Technically, my shift had ended because I was underage. I wasn't supposed to work past a certain time. I stopped the ATV and grabbed my radio to tell my dad I was heading back. That's when I noticed something to my right. At first, I thought it was just red moss or flowers, but when I looked closer, I saw a pile of wild strawberries a few meters into the trees. I turned the engine off completely. The sudden silence felt loud. I walked toward it slowly. It wasn't just a few berries scattered around. It looked like someone had dumped an entire bucket's worth onto the forest floor. There were too many for it to be an accident. They were crushed in some spots, still fresh in others. It didn't make any sense. People don't spend hours picking berries just to throw them away. I felt uneasy instantly, like I had walked into something private. I radioed my dad and told him what I'd found. He said the rest of the team was heading our way and told me to stay put. I should have stayed put, but I didn't. Something about the berries bothered me. The pile wasn't random. It felt placed. I stepped further into the trees, scanning around. That's when I saw it. A light pink bucket leaning against a tree about 30 meters away. It matched the description exactly. I swear my heart dropped into my stomach. I approached it slowly. I don't even know what I was expecting. Maybe it would be empty. Maybe she dropped it and walked off confused, but when I looked inside, I froze. There was a rabbit in it, or what was left of one. At first, my brain didn't fully process what I was looking at. Then it hit me. It wasn't torn apart like normal predator kills. I've seen foxes eat rabbits. I've seen hawks tear them up. It's messy. There's fur everywhere. Bones cracked, meat ripped unevenly. This was not that. The skin looked carefully opened, almost sliced. The inside was hollow, completely hollow. The bones were there, but stripped so clean they looked washed. Not gnawed, not cracked. Clean. It didn't look natural. It looked deliberate. And then I noticed the ground around the bucket. There was a circle made of the same wild strawberries. They weren't thrown randomly. They were placed in a rough ring around the bucket. Not perfectly symmetrical, but intentional enough that you couldn't mistake it for coincidence. It looked like some kind of ritual, or like someone wanted it to be found. I suddenly became very aware of how quiet it was. No birds, no insects buzzing, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing. I felt like I was being watched. I actually turned in a full circle slowly, just scanning the trees. Every shadow looked darker than it should have. Every trunk looked like it could be hiding something. I had to look away from the bucket because I thought I was going to throw up. My dad found me maybe 5 minutes later, but it felt longer. He saw my face first before he saw what I was looking at. When he stepped closer and looked into the bucket, he went completely silent. I had never seen my dad look unsettled in the forest before. Ever. He told me to go back to the ATV and wait. I refused. I didn't want to stand there alone with my back to the trees. When the rest of the search team arrived around 20 minutes later, the mood changed immediately. They expected maybe a dropped item. Not that. They examined the bucket, confirmed it matched the one from the camera footage. They searched the area for hours, expanding circles, checking every direction, even bringing in dogs later that night. The dogs refused to go near the bucket. They would pull away, whine. One of them actually started growling at the trees instead of tracking. No blood was found, no drag marks, no clear footprints leading away, just that circle, that rabbit, that bucket. The woman was never found. No body, no clothes, nothing. Officially, she's still listed as missing. And sometimes I try to convince myself it was some disturbed person playing a sick prank, but that almost makes it worse, because that means someone was out there watching me and had enough time to carefully place berries in a circle and clean an animal down to the bone. The next story happened later that same summer, closer to the end of August. By then, I had been given more responsibility. At first, I was just helping with searches, driving around, and checking areas, but as the summer went on, they started trusting me more. I was allowed to respond to calls directly and assist in actual rescues. I was proud of that. I took it seriously. That day started like any other. Warm afternoon, nothing unusual. Then sometime after lunch, we got a call about a missing hiker. A man in his mid-30s had gone into the forest earlier that morning and stopped answering his phone. His wife reported him when he didn't come back to his car by early afternoon. They had an idea of where he had entered from, the northern side of the forest, but no one had seen him since. I offered to take the southern section because I knew it was best. That part includes an old Soviet bunker that sits deep in the woods, hidden off a logging road that most people don't even realize is there anymore. I don't know why, but something made me think to check there first. The bunker has always felt strange to me. It's just a concrete structure, half covered in moss, nothing dramatic, but the air around it is always colder. The metal door is heavy and uneven on its hinges, so it usually hangs slightly open. When I drove into the small clearing, the first thing I noticed was that the door was fully shut. That already made me pause. I turned off the ATV and walked towards it. I remember feeling slightly annoyed more than scared. I thought maybe someone was camping inside illegally or messing around. I reached for the handle. Before I could touch it, the door opened from the inside. A man stepped out. For a second, neither of us said anything. We just looked at each other. He didn't look panicked. He didn't look tired or injured. He just looked normal. Maybe a little pale, but that could have been the lighting. I asked him what he was doing there. He looked at me like the question surprised him. "Just looking around," he said. His voice was steady, calm, not defensive. I asked if he was lost. He hesitated, but only briefly. "I guess you could say that." I asked for his name. It matched the one from the missing persons report. I remember feeling relieved at first, like, okay, this is simple. I found him fast, good job. But something about him didn't match the situation. Most people who get lost are either embarrassed or visibly stressed. They talk too much or not at all. They're shaken. He seemed curious, like he was observing me more than anything else. I told him there was an active search happening and that I could take him back to the northern road where his car was supposedly parked. He agreed without question. He climbed onto the ATV behind me. The ride started normally. I took the route I usually take, not the fastest, but the safest. After a few minutes, he tapped my shoulder. "You can turn left here," he said. There wasn't a visible trail there. "That's not a path," I said automatically. "It is," he replied calmly. I looked closer and realized he was right. There was an old logging shortcut barely visible between two trees. One I knew about, but not many people did. I turned, we drove a little further. Then he pointed out another shortcut. Then another. Each one saved time. Each one was correct. He wasn't guessing, he wasn't hesitating. He spoke like someone who had walked those paths before. That's when I asked him how he knew the area so well. He shrugged slightly. "Been around," he said. That answer didn't sit right with me. He had been reported missing from the northern entrance that same morning. According to the report, it was his first time hiking here. Yet he was guiding me through parts of the forest that even some locals avoid. The rest of the ride was quiet. I remember becoming very aware of how steady he was sitting behind me. Not gripping tightly like someone unfamiliar with ATVs, just balanced. Like he knew exactly how it would move. When we reached the northern road, there was a dark car parked off to the side. He got off the ATV, thanked me, and walked toward it. I watched him unlock it and get inside. I waited until I saw the engine start. Then I radioed in that the missing hiker had been located and returned safely to his vehicle. Everyone sounded relieved. Search called off. I drove home feeling proud. Honestly, it felt like I had handled it pretty well. A few hours later, I got a call from the main ranger. His tone was different. He asked me to walk him through exactly what happened. I did. There was a long silence on the other end. Then he said they had just located the missing man's car. It hadn't moved. It was still parked where it had been earlier that morning. Locked, cold engine, no sign of recent use. I remember standing there with my phone in my hand, feeling embarrassed at first. I thought maybe I had mixed up vehicles. Maybe there was another dark car and I hadn't paid close enough attention. But I know what I saw. They restarted the search immediately. This time it lasted 3 days. They found him on the third day, about 12 kilometers from the bunker. Alive, but severely dehydrated and confused. When they asked him what happened, he said he remembered going into the forest and then getting turned around. He said he had been wandering alone the entire time. He had no memory of being near the southern section. No memory of the bunker. No memory of me. When they asked if he had encountered anyone during those days, he said no. He insisted he had never been that far south in the forest. The part that stays with me is this. When they found him, he was barefoot. His shoes were never recovered, but the bottoms of his feet weren't torn up the way you'd expect after walking that far through the forest terrain. There were scratches, yes, but not enough to match the distance. I never told anyone about the shortcuts he pointed out, or the way he looked at me when he stepped out of the bunker. It wasn't fear, it wasn't confusion, it was recognition. And sometimes I still think about that moment. The metal door opening from the inside before I even touched it. I still don't know who I gave a ride to that day. Next story. This happened in autumn, right before hunting season started. The Maine forest ranger had asked me to stop by his place one afternoon. He had this small room attached to his house where he kept all the equipment. Radios hanging on hooks, old folded maps pinned to the wall, and a shelf with trail cameras stacked in boxes. He handed me one still in its packaging and said, "Strap this onto that pine tree near the lower trail. We need to see how the deer are moving before the season starts." Nothing strange about it. It was normal preparation. Every year around that time, we'd check certain areas just to see how active they were. I knew exactly which tree he meant. There's a stretch of forest where the ground dips slightly and animals tend to pass through. Not a man-made trail, just one of those places that becomes obvious when you've walked the same woods for years. I went out that same afternoon. It was one of those quiet autumn days where the air felt heavier but not cold yet. Leaves were already covering parts of the ground, and everything had that muted orange and brown look. Then I picked the tree. It was a thin pine, bark rough and uneven. I wrapped the strap around it tightly and secured the latch. I always pull hard on the strap, tighter than most people probably would. I don't like cameras shifting if there's wind. I adjusted the angle carefully, stepped back. I walked in front of it to make sure it triggered. The little red light blinked like it should. I even remember tapping the side lightly, just to double check it was active. It felt solid. I left it there and didn't think much more about it. About a week later, I went back to do a routine check. Normally, you just swap the SD card, maybe glance at a few clips on the tiny screen to make sure it's still working, and head home. As I walked up to the area, something felt slightly wrong, but I couldn't tell what. Then I realized the camera wasn't where I expected it to be. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had walked to the wrong tree. Forests can look repetitive if you're not paying attention, but I knew this area well. I stepped closer. The thick pine still had the faint indentation marks in the bark from where the strap had been pulled tight. They were subtle but visible if you knew to look. The camera just wasn't there. I felt that small drop in your stomach when something doesn't line up. Then I noticed it. A few meters away, strapped to a thinner tree. It wasn't thrown on the ground. It wasn't hanging loose. It was secured properly. Tight strap, correct height, and it was still facing the same direction down the trail. I just stood there staring at it for a few seconds. If someone had randomly found it, they would have either stolen it or just ripped it down. Most people don't take the time to carefully relocate something and make sure it's angled correctly. I walked over slowly and checked the ground around both trees. It had rained a couple days earlier, so the soil was still soft enough to show tracks. There were deer prints, small animal tracks, but nothing clearly human right around the trees. That didn't mean much. The ground isn't always perfect for showing footprints, but still, I tried to convince myself that maybe I had remembered wrong. Maybe I had originally strapped it to this thinner tree and my brain just filled in the thicker one because it looked more obvious. But I'm careful with equipment. I remember choosing the thicker trunk because it was sturdier. I remember pulling the strap tight and seeing it press into the bark. Still, memory isn't perfect. So I pulled the camera down and opened it to check the footage. The first few days were completely normal. Deer passing through, one fox late at night, nothing unusual. Then I reached a clip from just after 2 a.m., about 4 days in. In that clip, the camera was still in the original position. I could see part of the thick pine trunk slightly on the left edge of the frame, exactly how I had set it. The image looked normal. Then the video glitched. Just a short burst of static. 2 seconds maybe. The next clip started only a few minutes later, and the angle was different. Slightly higher, shifted to the right. The thick pine trunk was no longer visible at the edge. The thinner tree was. I went back and replayed it several times. There was no footage of someone approaching the camera, no hands blocking the lens, no obvious long gap in time. Just one clip in the original position, then static, then the new angle. The timestamps were continuous, no missing hours that would explain someone unstrapping it, moving it, and reattaching it. I remember feeling embarrassed more than scared at first. Like maybe there was some technical explanation I didn't understand. Maybe the camera had glitched and reset its orientation somehow. But cameras don't move themselves to another tree. I stood there longer than I probably needed to, just replaying those few seconds over and over on the tiny screen. Eventually, I took a deep breath, reattached it to the original tree, tightened it hard, and left. When I mentioned it to the forest ranger later, he shrugged and said maybe someone had been messing around. That's the easiest explanation. Maybe someone saw it, moved it for fun, and left. But still, no one can do it this quickly, and especially that late into the night. Alright, now on to another story. This happened in the winter after I turned 18. I wasn't working full-time anymore, but I still helped out whenever I could. Especially in winter. That's when things tend to go wrong the fastest. People think snow makes everything simple. You can see tracks, you can follow paths, but the cold changes everything. One bad decision, and it's over. Early one morning, before it was even fully light outside, I got a call about a young man who had gone hiking the day before and never came back. His car had been found parked near one of the forest entrances, and his phone had died sometime in the afternoon. They had already searched parts of the trails the previous evening, but had to pause once it got too dark. They wanted me to help check the lake area. I knew that lake well. My siblings and I used to swim there every summer. It wasn't huge, but it felt big when you were a kid. In winter, it freezes over completely. If it's been cold long enough and that winter had been brutal, the ice becomes thick and solid. People walk across it without thinking twice. That morning, it was painfully cold. The kind of cold that makes your eyelashes freeze slightly if you stand still too long. The sky was pale gray, not quite sunrise yet. A thin layer of fresh snow had fallen overnight, just enough to clearly show any movement from the past few hours. I drove my ATV slowly toward the lake and cut the engine a little before reaching the shore. The silence hit immediately. The lake was a flat, white sheet stretching between dark tree lines. It looked almost peaceful. I started by checking the shoreline. Usually, when someone is lost or unsure, you see hesitation in their tracks, circles, back and forth pacing, signs of confusion. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. Then my eyes adjusted to the brightness of the snow, and I saw them. Footprints. They started from the edge of the lake. Clear boot prints, pressed cleanly into the thin layer of snow. Definitely adult-sized. The tread pattern was visible, winter boots. They went straight out onto the ice, not wandering, not zigzagging, just a straight line. I stepped closer to the shore and studied them carefully before stepping onto the lake myself. The ice beneath the snow looked smooth and solid. There were no visible cracks radiating out from the prints, no darker patches suggesting weak spots. I tested the ice with my weight before committing fully. It didn't shift or creak beyond the normal sounds frozen lakes make. I followed the footprints slowly. Each step was evenly spaced, calm, measured. Not someone running, not someone panicking. It was like he had simply decided to walk straight toward the center. The lake isn't enormous, but standing out there in winter makes it feel larger. The tree line looks farther away once you leave the shore. The prints continued steadily, and then they stopped. I remember the exact feeling in my chest when I reached the last one. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a shock. It was confusion. The final footprint was as deep and clear as the others. No sign of slipping, no drag mark, no disturbance in the snow beyond it. Just the final print. And then untouched snow stretching ahead. I stood there longer than I probably should have, scanning the area. I turned slowly in a full circle, looking for any continuation, any sign he had doubled back in his own prints, but there was nothing overlapping them. No second layer, just one path out. No path back. I crouched down and brushed some snow aside near the final print, just to look at the ice itself. It was intact, no crack, no hole, no thin patch that had given way and somehow sealed itself again. The ice was thick enough that it would have taken serious force to break through. Later that day, they drilled into sections of the lake just to be sure. The ice thickness was consistent, solid all the way through. He hadn't fallen in, and yet the footprints ended in the middle. We expanded the search into the surrounding forest. We searched for days, dogs, volunteers, drones. A few days later, they found his winter coat hanging on a low branch a few kilometers from the lake. Just the coat. Not torn, not buried, not hidden. Placed. That part never really sat right with me either, because that night temperatures dropped to around minus 25 degrees Celsius. No one removes their coat voluntarily in that kind of cold, not unless something is very wrong. They never found him. No body in the lake, no remains in the forest, just the car at the entrance, the footprints on the ice, and the coat hanging in the trees. And I have another story for you guys. This happened in early autumn during peak mushroom season. We got a call about a middle-aged woman who had wandered off the path while picking mushrooms. Her husband had been with her, but they separated for just a few minutes, which is how most of those stories start. He couldn't find her after that. It sounded simple enough. It usually is. People get distracted, walk a little too far, and suddenly everything looks the same. The location they gave me made me almost relieved. It was an area of the forest I knew better than anywhere else. It's close to my house. I've walked those paths since I was a kid. I know which trees lean slightly to the left, which rocks sit under the moss, where the ground dips unexpectedly. I could have walked in the thick fog and still known exactly where I was. I drove my ATV out there without feeling any stress at all. I parked it on the main path where her husband had last seen her. He was standing there, clearly shaken but not hysterical. He said she had stepped off the path toward a patch of mushrooms and never came back. I told him to stay put and that I'd check the surrounding area. I walked into the forest, not far from the path, just the places where people usually wander, 10, maybe 20 meters off the trail. That's where most get turned around. I called her name a few times, nothing. I walked a little deeper, maybe another 30 meters, still nothing. And then something shifted. I can't explain it better than that. I stopped walking because I suddenly realized I didn't recognize what I was looking at. At first I thought I just turned around too many times while scanning the trees. So I did what I always do. I picked a landmark, a bent pine, a large stone, something familiar, but nothing looked familiar. The trees looked wrong, not physically different, just unrecognizable. I turned slowly in a full circle. The forest felt the same, but none of it felt known. I've spent almost my entire life in that area. I know the layout instinctively, and in that moment, it felt like someone had erased that knowledge. My chest tightened immediately. I tried to retrace my steps back toward the path, but I couldn't remember which direction I'd come from. That's when panic started creeping in. Not dramatic panic, but just that slow, rising heat under your skin. I started walking in what I thought was the direction of the path. After maybe a minute, I stopped again. Nothing. No sign of the main trail, no sound of the ATV, no familiar clearing. It didn't make sense. I couldn't have been more than 100 meters from where I parked. I called her name again, louder this time, but by then I wasn't really thinking about her anymore. I was thinking about myself. I tried to slow my breathing and focus. I told myself I was overreacting, that I had just turned around too many times and disoriented myself. But every direction looked equally unfamiliar. The panic fully hit then. I started pacing, walking faster, trying different directions, hoping something would click. Nothing did. It felt like being dropped into a forest I had never seen before. My hands were shaking when I grabbed my radio. I called the main forest ranger and told him, probably more panicked than I should have sounded, that I was lost. He paused for a second, probably thinking I was joking. I wasn't. He told me to stay where I was and that he'd send someone. I tried to stay still after that, but it was hard. I kept turning in circles looking for anything. A familiar tree, a fallen log, a change in terrain. Everything looked flat, endless, the same. Eventually, I heard someone calling my name. I answered immediately. They found me about 300 meters from where I had parked the ATV. 300 meters. When they reached me, they looked confused more than anything else. I must have looked pale because the woman who came to find me asked if I was feeling okay. I tried to explain that nothing looked familiar, that I couldn't recognize the area at all. She looked around and said, "You're right next to the lower trail. You can see it through the trees." I turned, and there it was. The path, visible, clear as day. I don't know how I hadn't seen it before. Then she asked me why it had taken so long for me to radio for help. I frowned and said I'd almost called immediately after realizing I was lost. She shook her head. "You went in there 2 hours ago." I remember staring at her, genuinely confused. 2 hours? There was no way. In my head, maybe 15 minutes had passed, 20 at most, but when I checked the time, she was right. I had been wandering in that small area for nearly 2 hours. 300 meters from where I'd started. I had completely forgotten about the missing woman during that time. They found her later that day. She had walked in the opposite direction and ended up near a small clearing. She was fine, cold and shaken, but fine. I wasn't. For weeks after that, I avoided that section of forest. Not because I thought something supernatural had happened, but because I couldn't explain what did. I've gotten turned around in unfamiliar forest before. That's normal, but not there. Not in the one place I could walk with my eyes closed. And the worst part isn't that I got lost. It's that for 2 full hours, I truly believed I had never been there before. And I have a few stories from my father. My dad isn't someone who tells ghost stories. He doesn't sit around talking about strange things that happened to him. He grew up in the forest, worked in it most of his life, and if something makes a sound, he'll tell you exactly which animal it probably was. He's practical, calm, not easily shaken. But over the years, I've managed to get a few stories out of him. This one happened in the early 2010s. There was a huge missing persons case. A little girl who disappeared while hiking with her parents. They had stopped along a forest trail, looked away for what they said was just a few seconds, and she was gone. The search was massive. Volunteers came from nearby towns, organized groups were sent out in sections. It went on for days. By the time my dad joined in, she had already been missing for nearly a week. People were still hopeful. But quietly, most were preparing for the worst. When there are large volunteer searches like that, they don't just let people wander off alone. For safety, they pair experienced forest workers or rangers with small groups of regular volunteers. Rangers have first aid training, wilderness training, and they know how to keep people calm if something goes wrong. My dad was assigned to a group of 5 volunteers. They had just been working most of the day, combing through their assigned grid. Nothing unusual, just slow, methodical searching. Calling her name every so often, watching the ground for anything out of place. By late afternoon, it was getting dark. They had one last small section left before they were supposed to head back to the main road where the other teams and emergency vehicles were stationed. It was dense forest, not a marked trail, just trees and underbrush. They stayed close together, no more than a few meters apart at any time. My dad said he turned around to check that everyone was still in sight. One of the women in the group was gone. At first, he assumed she had stepped behind a tree or bent down to check something. He called her name casually. No response. They all started calling for her. Nothing. No sound of movement. No snapping branches. No answer. My dad was about to radio the main team when one of the younger men in the group suddenly asked, "Where's my dad?" My dad said he froze. He counted. There were only 3 people left. Him, the young man, and one middle-aged woman. 2 people had disappeared within seconds of each other. And none of them had heard anything. No running, no struggling, no shouting. The forest was quiet. They called both names again. Louder this time. My dad walked in, widening circles around where they had last been standing. Nothing. No disturbed ground. No obvious footprints leading away. By then, it was nearly dark. As the group leader, my dad made the decision to pull back. He told the remaining 2 to stay close, physically close. He made them hold on to each other so no one could drift even a step away. They started moving quickly towards the main road. The young man was already panicking, calling for his father between breaths. My dad told him firmly to stop shouting and keep moving. He later told me that something felt wrong. Not just dangerous, but wrong. They had already walked maybe 50 meters when they heard it. A voice behind them, calling the young man's name. But not quite right. Close enough to recognize, just slightly off. Like someone trying to pronounce it without ever having said it before. The young man immediately tried to pull away from my dad's grip. "It's him," he said. My dad grabbed him harder. He told me he knew instantly that wasn't the father. He said he didn't know how he knew, but he did. The voice called again. Same, almost correct pronunciation, from the direction they had just come from. The young man broke free for a split second and turned towards the sound. My dad grabbed him under the arm and physically lifted him enough to drag him forward. He started running. Not jogging, running. He yelled at both of them not to look back. He told me he could hear something moving behind them. Footsteps, branches breaking, keeping pace, not gaining on them, just following. The young man was crying and shouting for his dad, fighting against my dad's grip. But my dad didn't let go. They ran until they reached the main road where other teams were stationed. When they burst out of the trees, people immediately knew something was wrong. My dad explained what happened: 2 volunteers missing, voices in the forest, because it was fully dark by then and that section was known to have wildlife activity. They were not permitted to re-enter until morning with proper teams. They waited. In the morning, they went back in. They found the woman and the young man's father lying on the forest floor not far from where they had disappeared. They were both unclothed. No visible injuries, no blood, no obvious signs of attack. Just lying there, barely alive. Their clothes were never found. The woman died on the way to the hospital. The father survived, but he had no memory of leaving the group. No memory of hearing his son call for him. No memory of the forest after that last section. My dad doesn't add details when he tells the story. He doesn't speculate. He just says that the voice wasn't right, and that if he had let go of that young man for even a second longer, he's not sure he would have come back either. He's told me that story once, and he's never told it again. I have another story from my father. I've heard it a few times, but the details always stay the same. This happened about 5 years ago. My dad had gone to cut firewood for my grandparents. They live close by, and there's a small patch of forest they own. Not our main land, but close enough that he knows it well. It was a normal day. He drove out there in the afternoon with his car and attached one of those heavy-duty carts behind it to transport the logs. The kind that's already a hassle to hook up even when it's empty. He worked for hours, cutting and stacking wood. Nothing unusual, just the sound of the chainsaw, the smell of fresh birch and pine, the usual rhythm of work. By the time he finished loading the last pieces into the cart, it was already getting dark. Not pitch black, but that deep blue hour where the forest starts to feel smaller. That's when he first heard the rustling. To his right, leaves shifting, branches moving. He didn't think much of it. It's the forest. Animals move around constantly. A fox, maybe. A deer. Even a moose. It's their home. But the rustling didn't stay in one place. It shifted. First to his right, then somewhere behind him, then slightly to the left. Not running, not crashing, just moving. He said that's when it started feeling odd. At first, he thought maybe wolves. There had been a lot of wolf activity in the area that year. Some had even attacked local dogs. Wolves usually avoid humans, but sick or desperate ones can behave unpredictably. It was already dark enough that he decided that was his cue to leave. He loaded the final logs into the cart, wiped his hands on his jacket, and got into the driver's seat. When he started driving, something immediately felt wrong. The car felt too light. If you've ever towed something heavy, you know the difference. You feel the resistance, the weight dragging slightly behind you. This felt like nothing was there. He stopped, got out. The cart was detached, completely unhooked from the car. Now, these carts are not simple. They are heavy even when they're empty. You don't just bump them loose. And this one was loaded with a fresh cut wood. It would have taken real effort to remove it properly. But there it was, standing behind the car, unattached. He stood there for a moment, just staring at it. He hadn't unhooked it. He was sure of that. He scanned the trees around him. Nothing. The forest was quiet again. He didn't know what else to do. He couldn't drive home without the cart, and reattaching it with all that weight pulling down would have been nearly impossible alone, so he started unloading the wood piece by piece. The entire time, he heard the rustling again. Closer now. Not frantic, not aggressive, just circling. He said that's when he started to feel something he doesn't usually admit to. Panic. Not full panic, just that creeping awareness that you're being watched. He worked faster, stacked the wood off to the side, reattached the cart properly this time, double checking the hitch. He made sure it clicked into place, made sure the lock was secure. Then he started loading the logs back in. That's when he heard it, a laugh. Not loud, not human in the normal sense, more like a faint chuckle. Short, low, right behind him. He froze. Goosebumps ran across his entire body. He didn't turn around. He dropped a few pieces of wood and walked quickly to the driver's seat instead of finishing. He started the engine. This time, when he pulled forward, the car felt heavy again. The cart was attached. For maybe 10 seconds, then suddenly light. The resistance disappeared. He didn't even stop this time. He just knew. The car had come off again completely. He said at that point, he didn't care about the wood anymore, or the cart. He just wanted to leave. He drove forward without it. When he reached the narrow exit road that leads back to the main road, he saw something that made his stomach drop. A tree was blocking his path. A fresh tree, not fallen naturally across the road like storm damage. It was lying perfectly across the narrow exit. And the strange part? It was a birch tree. That stretch of road is lined mostly with oaks and darker forest trees. A white birch trunk stood out immediately. He said it looked wrong there, like it had been placed. He slowed down slightly to look at it properly. That's when he heard the chuckle again. Closer than before. Not from the forest behind him, from near the car. He didn't wait. He slammed the door shut, reversed slightly, then swerved around the tree. Not on the road, but through the side brush and uneven forest ground. He damaged the side of his car, badly doing that. Scraped it against rocks and branches, but he didn't stop. He drove straight to my grandparents' house. When he told me the story, he didn't add dramatic details. He didn't speculate. He just said one thing that stuck with me. It felt like something didn't want me to leave. He went back the next morning with my uncle. The car was still there, the wood stacked neatly inside, and there was no birch tree blocking the road anymore. And this is one of the last real stories I ever got out of my dad. I know he has more, I'm certain of it. You don't spend your whole life in forests like that and only collect one or two strange memories, but he doesn't like talking about them. If you ask directly, he'll shrug it off. Say it was nothing, say people imagine things when they're tired. That's why I remember the evening he told me this so clearly. It was early fall. The air had that crisp edge to it, but it wasn't cold yet. The trees were just starting to turn. My dad was sitting on the front porch with a glass of whiskey, leaning back in his chair, staring into the tree line like he always does when he's thinking. He has this way of looking at the forest like it's an old friend, or maybe an old rival. I went and sat next to him. We didn't say anything for a while. Just listened to the wind move through the trees. Then, without me asking anything, he started talking. It was early spring, he said. There was still snow in patches that year, he told me. Not enough to feel like winter anymore, but enough that the ground was still half frozen in places. The birds had started coming back. The air was around 8 degrees, warm by our standards after months of freezing temperatures. He had been on duty that day, checking trail signs. After winter storms, the wooden path markers tend to tilt, fall, or get buried. Every few months, they need cleaning and resetting so hikers don't get turned around. It was routine work, nothing dangerous. But he said something felt wrong the moment he stepped into the forest that morning. It was too quiet. Spring is usually busy. People come out after winter like they've been released from cages. Families, hikers, runners, but that day, he'd barely seen anyone. No distant laughter, no dog barking, not even the usual echo of voices somewhere deeper in the woods. He went from sign to sign, brushing dirt off the arrows, tightening bolts, straightening posts, and then he heard it. A voice, faint at first. Help. He paused. He said what made him stop wasn't the word itself. It was the tone. It didn't sound like someone screaming for help. It sounded like someone speaking normally, flat, controlled. Help me. My dad's hearing is almost ridiculous. He can hear branches snap from far away. So he stood still and listened carefully. The voice repeated. Same volume, same tone. He called back immediately, asked where they were, asked if they were hurt. The answer came a few seconds later. Help me. Exactly the same. He said that's when something in his chest tightened. But if someone is calling for help, you go. That's not something he debates. He started walking towards the sound. The forest shifted as he moved deeper. The patches of snow grew thicker, the trees stood closer together, and the temperature dropped. Not gradually, suddenly. He said it felt like stepping through an invisible wall. His fingers went numb inside his gloves. His breath became visible again in thick white clouds. It had been warm enough to leave his heavy coat at home. Now it felt like he was standing in the middle of winter. The birds had gone silent. No wind, no rustling, just that voice. Help me. Over and over. The closer he got, the more his body reacted. His legs felt heavy, his head slightly dizzy, like altitude sickness. He described it once, but he didn't stop. The terrain started sloping upward toward a small hill. And that's when he saw the figure, a man sitting at the top of the hill, back turned toward him, completely still. The voice continued, help me. My dad called out louder this time. No response. He climbed the hill slowly. When he told this part, he stopped speaking for a while on the porch, just stared ahead, took a long sip of whiskey. I've never seen anything like that, he finally said. The man was dead. Not recently. His skin was pale and tight, almost gray. His clothes stiff from cold. his body rigid in a way that made it obvious he had been exposed to freezing temperatures for a long time. His eyes were gone, not bleeding, not damaged in a violent way, just empty, like they had never existed. And yet the voice was still coming from him, from inside his chest, repeating the same words. Help me. Same tone, same volume, like a broken recording. My dad said that's when he felt it. Not wind, not imbalance, hands. He said it wasn't a violent shove at first. It was pressure. Firm, intentional, like someone placing both palms against the middle of his back and leaning forward. He didn't have time to react. The pressure turned into force. He stumbled forward, lost his footing on that damp slope, and rolled down the hill. He said he remembers the sky flipping upside down, the white of snow mixing with dark tree trunks, and then something hard striking the side of his head. After that, everything went black. He doesn't know how long he was out for. He said when he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the sky through the branches. And for a moment, he genuinely didn't know where he was. That kind of blank, hollow confusion where your brain hasn't caught up to your body yet. He tried to sit up. That's when the pain hit. His leg didn't just hurt, it felt wrong. He said it felt like it wasn't attached correctly anymore. Sharp pain shot up through his hip and spine when he tried to move it. He laid there for a few seconds, just breathing, trying to remember. And then he saw the hill, and everything came back at once. He looked back up. The body was still there, and he swore, to this day he swears, that he saw a faint cloud of breath leave the man's mouth in the cold air. He tried to stand up and immediately collapsed. His leg was broken. He said the pain hit him so hard it made him scream. But he didn't stay. He said he knew staying wasn't an option, so he ran, on a broken leg. That's when the voice came again. Not distant, right behind him. Help me. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. He said every instinct told him that if he turned around and looked behind him, something would be there. So he kept running. He doesn't remember most of it, just flashes, trees rushing past, the sound of his own screaming, the taste of blood in his mouth. He reached the spot where he had parked his ATV and nearly collapsed beside it. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely get the keys out. He realized his radio was gone. He must have dropped it when he fell. The thought of going back up that hill to get it even crossed his mind for half a second. Then he started the engine. He said the drive to the ranger station felt longer than it ever had before. His vision started narrowing. The pain in his leg was so intense it made him nauseous. He had to lean forward over the handlebars to keep himself steady. He kept expecting something to step out in front of him. Nothing did. By the time he reached the house, his vision had blurred so badly he almost drove into the fence. He collapsed outside. The ranger found him on the ground. At the hospital, doctors told him the leg was broken in 3 places. Clean fractures, but severe. They couldn't understand how he had managed to run on it at all. He never told the hospital staff what he saw. He only told the ranger. I remember that time clearly, even though I was only 5. My mom told us he had fallen at work. He had stitches in his head, a cast on his leg for weeks. The next day, the ranger went to check the location. There was no body, no signs of disturbance, just normal forest. He did find my dad's radio, but it wasn't smashed from impact. It had been taken apart. The casing opened, the internal pieces removed, not broken, removed. Some parts missing completely. That night on the porch, after he finished telling me, I asked him, "Is that why you don't go to that part of the forest anymore?" He stared at the trees for a long time before answering. "There are things in the woods," he said quietly. "Not every story has an ending. Not everything gets explained." I had been thinking something for years, and I finally asked it. "Why don't we just move?" He put down his glass and looked at the forest again. "And live in a quiet suburban house where nothing ever happens," he said, almost smiling. "Where's the adventure in that?" He gave one of those tired, soft smiles that reaches his eyes. Then he stood up and went inside. I stayed on the porch long after that, staring at the tree line. I realized something that night. I was slowly becoming my father, and I wasn't angry about it. And this next story happened not long before I moved away. It was one of those late summer days where everything still feels alive, but you can tell it's starting to fade. The evenings were getting cooler. The forest had that heavy smell, mushrooms, damp earth, leaves starting to turn even though it wasn't fully autumn yet. That week had been busy. Mushroom pickers everywhere. Cars parked in places they shouldn't be. I wasn't really helping much anymore. I was packing, sorting through my life. I remember sitting on my bedroom floor surrounded by old maps and ranger notebooks and gear I'd collected over the years. Spare gloves, a broken compass, an old flashlight that flickered if you shook it. There was a rookie training camp starting soon, and I figured they could use some of it. It felt better to give it away than take it with me. So I packed everything into a big box and strapped it onto my ATV. My parents had gotten me my own ATV not long before that, and I was stupidly proud of it. The ride to the ranger's house was calm. The sun was low but still bright, filtering through the trees in that golden way. Nothing felt threatening. If anything, it felt like one of those perfect forest days you want to remember. I was about 5 minutes away when it happened. A dog ran across the trail right in front of me. I hit the brakes so hard I almost lost control. My heart actually hurt from how hard it jumped. The dog passed so close I could have reached out and touched it. Bright blue collar. I knew that collar instantly. Stella, the ranger's dog. She had to be ancient at that point. Slow, stiff, mostly staying near the house these days. I remember thinking how weird it was that she was out there alone, that far from the yard. But I didn't stop. I was basically there anyway. When I pulled into the driveway, the ranger was outside waiting for me like he usually did when he knew I was coming. I jumped off the ATV, handed him the box, and we talked for a while. Normal things. The camp, my move, whether I'd missed the forest, and then I saw Stella walk out from inside the house. Slow, stretching, yawning. I laughed a little and said, "She made it back fast." He looked at me like I had said something strange. "What do you mean?" "I just saw her on the trail. She almost got hit." He didn't laugh. "She's been here all day," he said. "Hasn't left." I remember looking at the dog. Really looking. Same collar, same gray fur around her muzzle. I told myself I must have seen another dog. It wasn't impossible. Mushroom season brings people. People bring dogs. Still, it sat weird in my stomach. Before we could really get into it, his wife came home. She was always like sunlight walking into a room. When I told her I was just dropping things off and saying goodbye, she refused to let that be the end of it. "You're not leaving like that," she said. "You're coming in." So I did. We had tea, then more tea. We talked about everything and nothing, about how fast time moves, about how the forest changes people. I didn't notice how dark it had gotten until I stood up to leave. The air outside had cooled completely. That sharp evening chill had settled in. The ranger walked me to the door. We hugged. I felt weirdly emotional about it. I stepped outside and was about to start the engine when I felt someone grab my arm. His wife pulled me back inside without saying anything. The look on her face made my stomach drop before I even knew why. She pointed out the window. About 15 meters from the house, near the edge of the trees, stood a dog. Just standing there. Bright blue collar, staring directly at the house. At us. I remember the silence inside that room because Stella was standing right next to us. Old, slow, pressed up against the ranger's leg. The dog outside looked exactly like her. Exactly. Same posture, same shape, same collar, but something was wrong. It wasn't blinking. It wasn't shifting its weight the way dogs do. It just stood there, perfectly still, like it was waiting for something. The real Stella let out this low, strange sound. Not a bark, not quite a growl. Something uncertain. The one outside took a step forward. And that's when it became clear it wasn't right. It moved stiffly, not limping, not injured, just wrong. Like it had studied how dogs move, but didn't fully understand the rhythm of it. The legs seemed slightly out of sync with each other, too deliberate. It took another step, head tilting slightly too far to one side, still staring. None of us spoke. I remember thinking how small the distance was between us and it. 15 meters isn't much. The ranger finally said quietly, "You're not going outside tonight." His voice wasn't dramatic. It was calm, firm. "That's not my dog." He called my dad. I could hear enough to know he wasn't joking. My dad didn't argue. He told me to stay inside, no heroics. We kept watching. The dog outside stood there for a long time. Then slowly, without looking away, it turned. The movement was almost delayed, like it had to think about how to walk. And it went back toward the trees. And that was it. It didn't rush. It didn't look back. It just blended into the forest like it had always been there. I slept on their couch that night. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, the ranger drove me home himself. We didn't talk about it much. None of us really did. Since I moved away, I've sometimes wondered if they ever saw it again, or if it was just there that one night. If I had left earlier, I would have been alone on that road, and I don't like thinking about that part too much. To preface this story, my dad has 30 or so acres in southern Tennessee in the heart of Appalachia in the Trail of Tears. We have a camper parked on a property that we stay in when we go on weekend hunting trips. This story takes place in January of 2020, and I had already been hunting for 2 days. The air inside the camper had gone stale, the smell of propane and a cold cup of coffee. I was sitting on the edge of the narrow bunk, pulling on my socks, thinking about the short hike to my tree stand. That's when I heard something hit the door of the camper. It wasn't a knock. It was a heavy thud, like a shoulder leaning against the aluminum. "Hey son, you awake? Unlock the door." My heart did a double thump. I knew that voice. It was deep, a little raspy from 30 years of Marlboros. It was my dad. But something wasn't right. My dad was down in Texas, building a cell phone tower. He had just sent me a photo of a sunset near Odessa 12 hours ago. "Dad?" I called out, standing up so fast I bumped my head on the low ceiling. What are you doing here? I thought you were in Texas." "We got rained out." The voice replied through the door. It sounded perfectly normal. Same tired tone he used when he'd had a long drive. "Drove straight through. I'm whipped, son. Let me in. It's freezing out here." I reached for the door handle, my thumb hovering over the deadbolt. I was smiling, honestly relieved to have the company for the morning hunt. But as my hand closed on the cold metal, I paused. The details started to feel wrong. First, it was the timing. Even if he'd left Texas the second he sent that text, he couldn't have made it to the Cumberland Plateau in 12 hours. Second, there was no truck. The camper sits on a ridge about 50 yards from an old logging road. You can hear a vehicle coming as soon as it gets in the driveway, the gravel crunching, the engine revving as it makes it up the hill. But the woods were dead silent. No headlights had hit the camper windows. No door had slammed. "Hey Dad, where'd you park?" I asked, my hand still on the lock. "Down by the creek," he said. "The mud's getting deep. Didn't want to get the truck stuck." Something about the answer didn't make sense. I drive a 2-wheel drive Ford Ranger, and my dad drives a 4-wheel drive full-size Chevy, so I moved to the small window beside the door, my breath fogging the glass. I wiped a streak clear and looked out. There he was, standing in the dim yellow glow of the porch light I'd rigged up. He was wearing his old Carhartt and his Marine Corps hat. He was looking down at his feet, hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Come on, son," he said, his voice muffled by the door. "My hands are freezing." I was about to turn the bolt when he shifted his weight. He didn't move like a man who had just spent 18 hours in a truck. He didn't stretch his back or rub his neck. He moved with a strange liquid jerk. And as he stepped closer into the light, I saw his hands. They weren't in his pockets. His arms were hanging straight down at his sides, but the sleeves of the jacket were empty. The fabric was just flapping in the wind. The hands were coming out from under the hem of the jacket, near his waist. Then he looked up. The face was Dad's, the same jawline, the same 3-day stubble, but something was off about the nose. It was crooked, and the wrinkles where he normally has them were barely visible, like the skin was being pulled tight from the back of his head. I reached for the .380 that I kept when I go to the woods in case of bears or people. The county we hunt in has a lot of drug addicts and thieves. I looked out the window again, and he had moved back a step or two, like he was waiting for me. I called my dad on my phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Of course. The figure outside was standing still. Not waiting still, but almost like a statue. I go as silent as possible, waiting for anything to happen. Any way I can be sure that's not my dad. After about an hour of whatever it is not moving, the figure walks away, and I take a deep breath, and just as soon as the encounter had begun, it was over. I don't sleep that night. As soon as the sun is up, I start to pack. I put my rifle on my back and keep my .380 in my hand. I load up all of my gear and myself into the truck. I drive with the gun in my right hand until I get onto the main road. I call my dad, and he answers on the first ring. "Hey son, what's up?" I ask where he is, and he says, "What do you mean? You know I'm in Texas." I tell him bye and hang up the phone. To this day, I don't know what I saw, but I haven't been hunting alone since. Thank you, Snook. Hello, Snook. Your videos were recommended to me a while back, and I've been binging them while I work since. I'm hoping that this is a good place to share this experience if you're still sharing subscriber-submitted stories. I know it's not really that scary, but I saw what I saw and experienced what I experienced, and I really don't have any answers. I'm sure this will be quite long and rambly, so I apologize for that. I would like to start off by saying that I'm absolutely not someone who can just casually fall asleep, and definitely not by accident. I see my boyfriend and brother start nodding off while watching TV, and I can't even imagine. I have to purposefully put in effort to fall asleep every night. I have to lay down, close my eyes, and do mental jumping jacks to even start to doze off. So I'm so very sure that what I saw wasn't a dream, even if it does seem like the best explanation for the first experience. My boyfriend, S, and I started dating when we were 14 and 15 years old, moved in together at 17 and 18, and moved to the state that my mom was from for better high-paying job opportunities at 18 and 19. A couple of months after we moved out of state, S's mom, W, found out that her landlady was planning to sell the house she had been living in for several years. She absolutely loved the town she lived in and the surrounding water and woods activities in the UP, but was having a difficult time finding another pet-friendly rental in her budget in the area. She had been separated from her husband for years, but they hadn't actually divorced at the time. As a solution to the housing problem, she asked him to buy her out of her half of the house they had shared so she could purchase a home in the area. She found a really nice yet very old home about a block from the beach that was in the wealthy part of town. It was somehow in her budget, being sold by the local animal shelter. The house was definitely a fixer-upper, but for the price and location with the deadline to leave the rental coming closer, she rushed to put in an offer. Immediately after she received the keys, she had done as much as she could to make the house livable, pulling up carpets, removing things from the walls, painting, sealing, replacing, etc., but needed help with some things. It was around Christmas time, so we volunteered a 3-day trip to help her with a couple remodeling challenges and unpacking, as well as to have a late Christmas celebration. The house was beautiful on the outside. It definitely looked like it should have cost a whole lot more than the asking price. The inside was a lot less happy. It felt dark and depressing. She had painted a couple layers of white paint over the wood paneling that took up a good chunk of the main floor, but it still felt sad. She showed us the luxurious upstairs and the previously hoarded basement that still had stickers, nails, and screws placed in or on literally every surface possible. She had a box of random things she had discovered around the house so far, newspapers, clippings of random things ranging from the 1950s to 2018, magazines, toy cars, feathers, seashells, belt buckles, and many other things that had been tucked in vents, under the stairs, behind walls, left in cabinets. It was a little creepy, but most of it was pretty cool. After the tour, we sat up in the living room to exchange gifts, eat pizza, and just catch up. S and his mom smoked a little, so we decided collectively to begin work on the house the next day. At around 9 p.m., which was 8 p.m. where we lived, W said that she was tired and was ready to head back to bed. So we said goodnight and went to our sleeping areas. We were set up on the couch in the living room. It was a large L-shaped plush sectional. One side was parallel to the stairs that went upstairs and faced the railing, which was about 15 feet away. That was S's side. My side faced the entryway to the house, but had a clear view of the bottom of the stairs if you turned your head even a little from a sitting position. W had also set up an oscillating fan for us to use. W and her dogs slept in the master bedroom upstairs. Since it was only 8 p.m. where we lived and I worked to 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. at the time, so was used to staying awake much later, I decided to stay up on my phone for a couple of hours before trying to sleep. In the morning, I woke up before everyone else, so I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, wash my face, and fix my very curly hair. I walked up to the bathroom counter and realized that there was no mirror, a side effect from the recent paint job that I had somehow not noticed the night before. I grabbed my stuff and walked upstairs to check the bathroom. Again, no mirror. I walked back down the stairs and did a once over in the dining room, living room, and office to see if there was maybe one as a part of the decor on the walls that I could at least part my hair with. There was absolutely none to be found, so I did my best I could with the front camera on my phone and went about my day. W and I went on unpacking while S installed light fixtures and changed out a couple outlets for modern ones that actually worked, as well as some other electrical and plumbing work. I even asked W about the lack of mirrors in the house that day. She said that the bathroom ones were outdated and quite gross, so she had ordered new ones to replace them. She mentioned that she had a nice big round one that she was planning on putting in the dining room, but she had dropped it during the move. It was one that I was familiar with from her previous home. She then said that I could use her vanity mirror in her room whenever I wanted. We finished the day and W and S went to bed around 10 p.m. again. I once again was not ready for sleep, so I curled up on the couch with my phone. I was scrolling social media and texted my mom back from earlier in the day. I lifted the blanket with one arm and held my phone on the other to roll over, and as I did, I noticed movement at the bottom of the stairs. I freaked out a little and immediately turned my flashlight on my phone to the bottom of the stairs. Nothing. I assumed it was just a shadow on the wall from the blanket when I lifted it up with my phone screen light on. I shrugged and went back to scrolling. About half an hour later, I sat up to grab my water and saw movement again. Again, I turned on my flashlight, and again, nothing was there. I told myself that there was proof that it was just my shadow freaking me out. 15 minutes later, the fan that W set up for us just stopped. I was definitely quite freaked out, but overall, it was just an old house with old wiring. Even if the outlet had just been replaced earlier that day, and it had been new out of the box and been running constantly since right before we got there, when the outlet was being replaced, I was pretty sure that there was some reason for it. A little while later, I was about to go to bed when W's dog started barking. Really crazy barking. That was definitely not normal for them, but they're dogs. Sometimes they just bark. However, it wasn't making me feel much better. The feeling in the house was just off at that point. There were too many small, unsettling things happening in a short amount of time for me to feel great. I could hear W talking to the dogs to calm them down and calling them up onto the bed with her. Knowing that I wasn't the only person awake made me feel a tiny bit better, so I decided to just go to the bathroom quickly before just forcing myself to go to sleep to be done with the creepy night. When I was in the bathroom, I splashed some water on my face and heard my phone quietly ding next to me. It was my mom responding. That immediately calmed me down. I still felt uneasy, but it was a lot easier to laugh at myself and write everything off as not being in a familiar place. To walk back to the couch from the bathroom was a straight walk through the kitchen, past the dining room, into the living room, past the stairs, and then a turn to actually sit on the couch. I was walking through with my flashlight on, through the kitchen, past the dining room, into the living room, past the stairs. I stopped straight in my tracks. My stomach dropped to my feet as I stared at the person staring back at me. Except it was me. Pajama pants, hoodie, messy bun, phone with the flashlight on framed in a huge 6-foot tall, 2-foot wide, full-length mirror with a dark wooden frame mounted about 6 inches above the baseboard on the wall at the bottom of the stairs. I stepped closer and moved my body closer to the railing to see more of myself. I waved my phone back and forth, and my reflection did the same. "Oh my God," I whispered to myself and mentally facepalmed. How dumb could I be? I was trembling like a child because I saw my own reflection. Dogs barked and a fan stopped working in an old house. I sat back on the couch, shaking my head at myself, filled with adrenaline, embarrassment, and confusion. How had I possibly not noticed the massive mirror at any point? Not when I walked up and down the stairs several times over the last 2 days. Not when we sat in the living room just feet away from the monstrosity for hours over the last 2 days. Not when I was searching the house for a mirror that morning. Not either time I shot my flashlight when I saw the movement. Not when I asked W about the lack of mirrors in the house. On top of that, I realized that the fan was working again. I was just entirely gobsmacked. I stayed awake for another hour, scrolling on my phone, and planning the story I'd tell S and W in the morning, planning to ask her how she had even managed to mount the giant thing by herself. Finally, I rolled over to go to sleep and saw the movement once again. For some reason, I decided to shine my flashlight over one last time. I fully expected to feel silly all over again, but there was nothing there. No mirror, no thick dark frame, no reflection, only a white painted wood paneled wall. I jumped up off the couch and ran to turn on the light and shake S awake. I was practically sobbing out of fear. I could picture it in detail in my head, every detail of my own reflection. It was right there. All of the posts I remembered seeing were all still there. The text I got from my mom in the bathroom was still there. I definitely didn't dream any of that into existence. S calmed me down and listened to me spiral for God knows how long before I finally went to sleep. The rest of the weekend passed without incident, and I just tried to forget about it. I never looked too long at a mirror again, though. Through the next couple of months, W learned more about the home and its previous owner from the neighbors. It was built in the late 1800s, and like most of the houses in that neighborhood, it was moved across frozen Lake Michigan around the 1930s. The most recent previous owner was an old man who had lived in the house since the 50s with his family. From all accounts, he seemed to be all of the worst parts of the man from Monster House. He went after countless people and neighbor kids with bats for knocking on the door or stepping on his mostly uncut grass. There was decades of domestic abuse calls and concerns against his wife, who passed away early in the 2000s. After she died, he completely cut off his adult sons. He spent his days mostly cooped up in the house, hoarding, drinking, and hating the world, as well as coating the house in stickers, nails, screws, staples, etc., and hiding his little treasures everywhere. Then, as a final screw you to his sons, he left his money, house, and all earthly possessions to the local animal shelter, which, as messed up as it is for his kids, might have been the kindest thing he ever did. He did, however, die in the house for a fact. The next door neighbor hadn't seen him as much as go to the mailbox in several months, so called for a welfare check, which didn't do much. She then contacted his oldest son, who found him deceased in the master bedroom. We also found a large, dark stain in the hardwood under the only new carpet in the house in the master bedroom, so that's something. I don't know if that had anything to do with the mirror or not, but that house was problematic to say the least. A year before the mirror incident, we decided to move back to my hometown, about 30 minutes away from W's house. We had an incredible relationship with her and looked forward to spending lots of times with her. The plan was to stay with W for about 3 weeks as we waited to sign the lease and move into our new rental. During this time, our car broke down in a way that we couldn't afford to fix at the time. S's new job was in the halfway point between our new town and W's town. He then had no way to get back and forth to work, and I hadn't found a job yet. W suggested that we stay with her and help remodel her house until we were on our feet again. It sounded like a great plan since the holidays were very close. We had lived with her in the past and had a great time when we did. At the very beginning, it was amazing, and it was so nice to have family close again. We even found jobs very quickly, but it went downhill fast. We all started to resent each other. We were all sick and exhausted all the time. My mind felt foggy and confused every day. W started smoking weed all the time, even on his lunch breaks. She would make horrible comments and go through our things. All of that was extremely out of character for her. But it really started with things constantly going missing in the house. Tiny, insignificant things. Parts of the furniture, house keys, mail, etc. All of this W blamed S for, even though he had no reason to take these things. Our things were going missing as well. An almost empty bottle of perfume, S's wallet, chargers, things from groceries, things that you remember putting somewhere and then it was gone. Another thing that happened frequently were broken phones. All three of us are people who have the same phone for years, but all of a sudden, we are all breaking our phones left and right. You'd set it on the bathroom counter to shower, and when you'd get out, it'd be cracked. Leave it on the coffee table to make a meal, come back, screen shattered. Drop it on the carpet, and it'd be spiderwebbed. Pretty much every month, one of us had a phone break. After a couple of months, we'd come home from work to our room being trashed. It was at least once a week. W would deny that it was her, so eventually we just stopped bringing it up. Though I do doubt it was her. One morning, we came home to both the inside storm door and outside door of her front door being wide open, and our cat was gone. We posted her in the local missing pet groups called the shelter and spent several days outside looking for her, as well as every day for months after when we weren't at work. We never found her. She was microchipped, and the shelter has a substantial lost and found pet program. That was the worst part of all of it. I hope someone found her and is trying to give her a good life. S and I became distant as we struggled to make ends meet because we started paying W significant rent since most of the remodel was done. We both started picking up as many extra shifts as we could to not have to be home. I really didn't think our relationship would last much longer. After about 4 months of living there, the pandemic hit. We were already so drained, so hateful, so unhappy, we stayed in that house for another year, barely speaking to each other. We worked, fought, worked some more. S and I DoorDashed just about every meal to not have to share the common areas because it would lead to a fight. W had started working from home, so we were told to basically never make any noise at home. She smoked nearly constantly and painted the house interior every day after work. From one room to another, coat after coat of different colors. All of these strange happenings continued the entire time, but if they were brought up, it'd be a fight. We tried so hard to find a rental, but basically nothing was available at the time. Finally, I reached out to my aunt who lived near where we had previously lived in the other state. I explained the situation and asked if it'd be possible to move in with her for a short time. She was ecstatic about the idea and happily agreed. We received our tax return, bought a car, found jobs there, and started packing. The situation in the house worsened after we told W that we were leaving. Our car keys went missing several times. The fights worsened. It felt depressing and inescapable. Finally, moving day arrived. W decided to go hiking while we left. We loaded our things up and left. It stormed the entire several-hour drive. My debit card went missing at some point. We luckily had enough cash for gas to get there. We arrived to my aunt's house hours later than we should have. We grabbed a couple things and knocked out for a few hours. We woke up to W having messaged my family saying that we were horrible and took her things and that she would be taking us to court, which she never did. We barely had a car full of things, much less any of the things she accused us of taking, which included large pieces of furniture. It was a bit stressful, but it finally felt like we could breathe again. We were well rested for the first time in over a year. The future felt possible again. S and I almost immediately stopped fighting. Our room wasn't a mess when we got home anymore. Our phones stopped breaking. Our things weren't going missing. We could communicate again. We found a rental very quickly, and we've been calm and happy together since. We never saw or heard anything that felt supernatural after that mere incident, but I truly believe it was the house that ruined our lives for a year. I have never felt the same way that I did while living there, and I plan to never feel that way again. W still lives there. We're not close anymore. She went from being a second mother to me, someone I looked up to being someone I couldn't recognize. We've met a couple of times for lunch in the last couple of years, but we have nothing in common and nothing to talk about. She's made a couple of apologies, and we don't have anything against her at this point, but I seriously doubt that we'll ever be close again. I don't know if it was the old, hateful man who lived there or something that happened there before, but that house changes you. And alright guys, with that final story, that wraps up some horrifying, scary stories. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I loved reading your guys' stories. The first story in the first compilation of stories with the park ranger from Estonia, shout out to you. You are an amazing writer. Those were some insane stories, and I hope you guys enjoyed their stories as well. And everyone else whose stories I read, also amazing. And I just love the super long stories. So if you are watching right now and want to be picked for a future video where I read one of your stories, please just spend a lot of time perfecting the story, making it long, making it really in depth, and just a great story. Just take your time with it because hundreds of thousands of people see it. So take your time, and your story will be in a video most likely, like these people in today's video. And you guys are the best. And please send in your scary stories. I read every single one, and I get a ton, so I can't include them all, but I try my best. And I just appreciate all of the support. It is beyond insane, and I just want to say thank you so much for watching. It means the world. I read every single comment, so please comment down below your thoughts and feedback and advice and concerns, everything. I read every single comment, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. And if you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy other videos on the channel. So go check out some other videos on the channel. And all right, that's enough yapping. Go check out some other videos. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. And this is Snook, and I'll see you next time. Bye.